That's right. Where, as Dana mentioned, there have been people celebrating for hours now, Phil. It looks like quite a scene there on the ground.
It's quite a scene, and the drum circles kind of getting loud over here. Everybody's been partying basically all night long. As soon as word broke, they come down here to Calle Ocho, which is 8th Street in Little Havana, which of course decades ago was the heart of the Cuban exile community. In modern years, it's become a little more Latin American, more Central American, but this is the place to go if you want to protest something that happened in Cuba or celebrate something that happened in Cuba. And today, this morning, it is absolutely a celebration for a man they have hated for years and years, has now finally passed away. Everybody here hoping for a positive forward progress for the island of Cuba. Joining me now is Frank Machado. What brings you here to Calle Ocho in the middle of the night in the early wee hours?
Oh, well, I found out at 4:30 in the morning. It's a momentous occasion. It's a historic occasion for the Cuban Americans and the Cubans in Cuba to see a dictator fall and die. We've been waiting for this for many, many years. We wanted Fidel Castro to die. We never wish upon any human being to die, but when you have a ruthless dictator like Fidel Castro, we wanted him to go, and it's a very, very historic occasion for all of us.
There have been so many rumors of his passing over the past 10 years, and every single time there'd be a huge parade of people down here.
Fidel Castro's tone remained defiant as ever.
Socialismo o muerte.
Socialism or death. Fidel Castro loved to hate America at every political turn.
Hasta la victoria siempre.
Eliancito, la patria te espera.
His own political stock, albeit small, soared during the international custody fight for Elian Gonzalez.
Bingo, bingo, bingo.
When the U.S. returned his little prince, Castro called the moment a moral victory over imperialist America. The man, born Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz in Biran, Cuba, came to power leading a ragtag band of bearded rebels to overthrow a dictator. He ended up becoming one himself. Castro stood defiantly against 10 U.S. presidents. Around the world, leftists who hated America's influence and power called Castro a hero. But for the U.S., he was the all-too-close face of the bitter Cold War. And while the world could never completely dismiss Castro politically, over time, to some critics, he seemed more like a caricature, with his wiry beard, faded fatigues, and 6-inch cigars. The man who would lead the small Caribbean island to communism was educated by Jesuit priests and earned his law degree at the University of Havana. Castro launched his first and failed revolution in 1953, where 30 of his followers were killed while attacking the Moncada barracks. Castro was imprisoned, then deported, but made his way back on an overloaded powerboat. After nearly a decade of coups, riots, and political rebellion, the people despaired of the government of Fulgencio Batista. He stepped down, left the country, and Castro seized power on January 1st, 1959. He held on for nearly 50 years. The most significant U.S. response to Castro's communist regime came in 1961, when President John F. Kennedy backed the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, where hundreds of Cuban exile fighters were captured and sent to prison or killed. The next year, American spy planes discovered secret Soviet missiles inside Cuba. After a 13-day U.S. naval blockade, the Soviet Union backed down and removed the missiles. Castro was enraged as the world watched two superpowers walk away from a nuclear nightmare. In 1980, Castro unleashed an unprecedented human wave of more than 125,000 Cubans on America. Mixed in with political prisoners were criminals, murderers, rapists, and the insane. The Mariel boat lift forever changed South Florida's landscape. 14 years later, as Cuba's economy collapsed further, Castro unleashed a second wave of human cargo. This time, whether America wanted them or not, 30,000 Cubans were coming to her shores again. In 1998, Cuba opened its island doors to Pope John Paul II. The Holy Father and the man who chained down Cuba's churches shared words before the world. Critics would later call the historic meeting little more than a public relations campaign. In the summer of 2006, Castro underwent surgery for intestinal bleeding and quietly ceded power to his younger brother, Raul. In February 2008, Castro announced he would no longer serve as Cuba's president and commander-in-chief. A surprising move few thought they would live to see. By the end of the month, the country's National Assembly formally elected Raul to succeed his brother, Fidel. After resigning as the head of Cuba's Communist Party in April 2011, Castro remained largely out of the public eye. With one notable exception, in March of 2012, he would welcome a second pontiff, Pope Benedict XVI. The two met privately at the end of Benedict's three-day visit to Cuba, despite the Pope's vocal opposition to Cuba's government. The two spoke for roughly 30 minutes, with Castro asking the Holy Father, "What does a pope do?" Still, Castro's conspicuous absence in later years fueled constant rumors about his health. When President Obama announced the softening of U.S. sanctions against Cuba in December 2014, President Raul Castro spoke with the American president by telephone, welcoming the announcement. But the man who brought communism to Cuba, Fidel, made no appearances and had no public comment on the ending of the Cold War freeze he'd ushered in more than a half-century earlier. Though often referred to as a tyrannical dictator, millions on the impoverished island considered Castro the charismatic leader who brought education and medicine to the masses. But to America's Cuban exiles, he was forever hated, responsible for Cuba's economic ruin. In Washington, Brett Baer, Fox News.
And I would do whatever is necessary to get a good agreement.
Trump says he could reverse those orders and might even break off diplomatic relations between the two countries.
And it really is an open question if President-elect Trump will follow through with those campaign promises to undo President Obama's work. We won't know exactly what Trump will do until he's sworn in January 20th. Alex?
Errol Barnett in Washington, thank you. Castro's reach extended far past his long and defiant relationship with the U.S. Jonathan Vigliotti has more worldwide reaction from London. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning, Alex. Glowing tributes came from predictable quarters this morning. Among them, Russia. The country's had a close tie with Cuba dating back to the revolution. President Vladimir Putin praised Fidel Castro, calling him, quote, a symbol of an era in a statement released by the Kremlin this morning. Putin also sent a telegram to Raul Castro saying Fidel was a sincere and reliable friend of Russia. In Moscow today, Russians brought flowers to the Cuban embassy there. Some people were crying, a much different scene from what we're seeing unfold in Miami. Former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev paid tribute, saying Fidel stood up and strengthened his country during the harshest American blockade. The Nelson Mandela Foundation is also among those sending their condolences, saying in a statement, President Mandela had a close relationship with Fidel Castro and always remembered his solidarity with the anti-apartheid movement. And Pope Francis, who played a key role in the restoring of U.S.-Cuban relations, is expected to send a telegram of condolence to the Cuban government later today. Anthony.
Jonathan Vigliotti in London. Thanks, Jonathan. Pamela Falk, CBS News foreign affairs analyst, who had face-to-face meetings with Castro when he was Cuban president. Pam, good morning.
Good morning, Anthony.
Let's start with how do you think this is likely to change things? We've got obviously a change in the U.S. administration, as Errol Barnett talked about. How is this going to change things in Cuba?
Well, Raul Castro has been ruling Cuba since 2008 when Fidel Castro retired and has made some reforms, including the entree to the opening of diplomatic relations with the Obama administration in 2015. But it's unlikely to change in a very big way, and especially in ways that people are really looking for, like human rights changes. So that has more to do with the system in Cuba, and they have already been reacting to the election of President-elect Trump. And so the idea here is Castro laid the framework for being a defiant dictator, a demagogue, also a charismatic leader, and a Soviet puppet all rolled into one. And that's the cult in a certain sense. It's the overview of the way people have seen him, and otherwise they've opened the door and forced people out.
What about the incoming Trump administration? We played some tape. Donald Trump's statements are different than where this current administration stands on policy. Do you expect ties to change?
For the moment, there may be some rolling back of some of the expansion that President Obama did in terms of travel of Americans. But when you look at the trajectory of the 10 presidents, the Republicans have done quite a bit. In fact, Ronald Reagan was the one who opened the door with nuclear relations and trade pacts and the coastal arrangements. So there was a lot done during Republican administration, because there's always the interest in trade. But what's interesting is there was a time in 1998 when the Orlando Hernandez, the Yankee brothers, Levon and Orlando Hernandez, wanted to go out, and it was the Castro administration. I mean, Castro himself was appealed to by the Pope. And he immediately said, I'm sorry, I asked the Pope. It was Cardinal O'Connor, the Vatican, the Cardinal O'Connor who actually said yes. And they were ready to let them out before President Clinton was ready to let them in. So I think sometimes you see changes, and you may very well see some interest. President-elect Trump has just said if he gets a better deal, he'll renegotiate.
All right. Pamela Falk, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Absolutely.
We'll have much more on the death of...
On Friday, the president-elect did name 2 figures to his White House staff. K.T. McFarland is being tapped as Deputy National Security Advisor. She currently works as an analyst for Fox News and has worked in the administrations of Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan. And Trump campaign attorney Donald McGahn is set to serve as White House counsel. Neither post requires confirmation by the